Hello, everybody. How are you doing tonight? Long time no talk. Happy whatever the Monday. Happy Monday. How was your day? How is your morning? I know I have folks listening all across the way. So let's just jump right into this because I know that we're gonna have so much to talk about during this episode. As you can see by the title, by the thumbnail, by the banner scrolling across the bottom, we do have a special guest today again joining us. I'm so delighted. Christopher C. Melcher, who goes by CA Divorce on Twitter. I'm just gonna pull him in here to the chat. Hi, Christopher. How are you doing? How is it going? You're looking lovely today.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been wanting to be on your show for a while again, and also just to thank you again for getting me into this movement or invigorated about it, because I remember when I was asked to do an interview about the Britney case and I didn't know much about it. I came across your videos, and and that's what got me hooked, because I don't, I'm not a, I didn't grow up listening to Britney's music or anything like that, but I grew up just being passionate about the law. And then when I saw your videos and how this case started, I was like, I can't even believe like what you're saying, and that this could actually happen in a court that I practice in, at least in LA. I was just so that what got me started. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I always love hearing that story because for the longest time, I was actually kind of like a little bit shy or bashful about like having like real lawyers find out that I was on working like within this movement and on the case and stuff like that. And so it really is, it makes me feel, good and like, it was all worth it and everything. So thank you also so much. And you also brought such an amount of credibility to the movement that really, I mean, it was like, oh yeah, that's a lawyer, but she's just brand new. But then you had, people like Lisa McCarley and others, and then you're like known and you've done interviews. You're like a guy who people listen to. And so it really helped a lot. Everybody played our part. I feel so lucky to have been part of this whole movement. And I was a little bit naive in thinking like, okay, Brittany's going to be free and things are just going to settle on down. But clearly, it feels like it's just getting heated up as far as the actual court questions and questions of law are concerned. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, but this is the good phase of it. Before there was so, and it's, it seems like so long ago, but it wasn't. And there's so much uncertainty. Would any court actually do anything about this? Would they actually let somebody out of a conservatorship, which many people are stuck in that forever? And so would she be free? And that was that first phase. And then now we're in payback time phase.
Right.
And so this is, she's in control. And it's a much better place to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me to hear you say your first point, right? Like the first question was, is she even going to get out? You heard people like Jamie Lynn Spears or people purporting to speak on her behalf saying things like she deserves to be in it forever. You had her father's lawyer, Vivian Lee Thoreen, saying on television to the New York Times, she's never seen a conservatorship end. The way it ends is the conservatee just passes away. And so, yeah, it brings all of that back to mind. And it just makes me wonder how this all could have happened because it just seems to the layperson just so obviously so wrong. And yet it happened, like you said, in a court you practice in. Like, what do you think has to happen for what has to fall into place for something so wrong to happen?
Yeah, and it's hard. Has been I'm been doing this almost 30 years as a lawyer, and I still like to think that there's justice and there's a system that works and truth will prevail. I want to believe that so badly. But then we see many cases where they're handled improperly, and ultimately I put all the blame on the judge, because people like Jamie are going to be like Jamie, and you're not going to change them, but it's the judge that is supposed to be the last stop and to say, no, I don't, this doesn't make sense to me. Or I want Brittany in here in person. I want to see her. I want to talk to her. I'm going to give her her own lawyer. Any of those common sense things that we would think would happen didn't. And so I lay all fault on the court. and I understand they're busy and they get fooled. I mean, that
But
happens.
too busy for Britney Spears's conservatorship case?
Well, that's part of the
Like,
problem is that sometimes in these celebrity cases, they, maybe think like, "Oh my god, I wanna be involved in this," and they sort of suspending common sense perhaps. The other element is when you have powerful lawyers coming into the room, sometimes the judges will defer to them and figuring
mhm.
like, well, they must know what they're doing because they're from this firm, and I'm just gonna I'll just go along with that, and it's saying, well, they must have vetted it. And
That's
again, it's
exactly what happened to me at my job, Christopher. It was the I was talking to the people at the firm and I said, "Would you be willing to show me the proof that you saw that these connections weren't there and whatever, whatever?" And they said, "Well, BJ, would you lie? You work at a good firm, you work here. Would you lie about something like that?" And I said, "Well, if I were complicit in a multi-million dollar criminal conspiracy, I probably would lie." I don't know, like probably. But
yeah,
yeah, it's like it's amazing how pervasive that attitude is within the legal community that just because someone has a certain credential or works at a certain place that they're like incapable of being even wrong, much less lying to you. You know what I mean? That's it's I hope that people stop having that mentality, but time will tell. I don't know. Sounds like it's been going on for a while. So,
yeah,
let's switch gears here because we have so much stuff to cover. So, I'm looking at kind of like our talking points we put together. Y'all are not going to be able to see them. That's just for the backstage crew. But I think because you and I were both actually in the court room where it happened on January 19th, we saw everything. Now, I do have a video if y'all want to watch like a kind of play by play. We're not going to be doing that here, but there was some kind of interesting conversations, in the hallways and things like that. I think the easiest way or the best way for us to do this is like go through our talking points and then we can just interject what we heard in the courtroom that made you believe this or, what have you. Does that sound good?
that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing, do you want to take the talking point about
Sure.
the
So
case being in the discovery phase?
yeah, I think that's to understand where we are and where we're going with this case. So at that last hearing that we attended, it went on for a long time and there was a lot of fighting and allegations being made between the lawyers, but ultimately it was just a status conference of saying like, "Hey, we got a lot of issues to determine here. When are we going to be ready to do those, and let's lay out the management of this case." And but then, lawyers being lawyers, they just all launch into their closing argument even though it was
And it
just
was intense, right? Does it normally get that heated in the courtroom or was this like particularly fiery?
Yeah, this was really, really fiery, and for good reason, I get it, and Judge Penny allowed a lot of latitude, because she coulda shut that down pretty hard to say, "Look, we're just picking dates here, we don't need to hear the closing argument," but
Yeah.
it was good to kinda get it all out there, and, so what's gonna happen is they're setting out a process, for first of all, what we call discovery. So we need to get information from each other, knowing like what everyone's claiming and where the documents are and who the witnesses are. And that takes time. And we're seeing people fighting about the exchange of that information and they want to block it or get it. So the attorneys were estimating by the end of July that they would be ready to proceed with the case.
And there was a
Yeah.
little disagreement, right, on that date between the two parties?
Well, that's right. That was a good strategy, move that you could see playing out. That Weingarten for Jamie was saying like, "Oh, we're ready. We can be ready next month and set a deadline, set a trial date." And so what the Weingarten's game was to
Weingarten,
basically
also known on this channel as Sloppy.
okay.
Well,
So
because, it's hard to keep a lot of these lawyers, apart. So
yeah.
Weingarten is Jamie Spears' new lawyer, the new one after Vivian left and all that, right? So he wants to have this hearing sooner than Rosengart, which is Brittany's lawyer, because it's a part, like you're saying, of a strategy.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So if you're in Weingarten's side, you actually want to push the case forward quickly because that cuts off Rosengart's opportunity to get the information. So that was the game Weingarten was playing at the hearing is like, hey, give us a trial date. And what that means in lawyer speak is a date by which all questions have to end, all this exchange of information.
And of
Rosengart's not
course,
falling for that.
Jamie is going to want that day to be today, right? He doesn't want to answer questions. So
That's
it
right.
seems he's refusing to, as far as we can tell so far, right?
Yeah, he holds all the information. It's Britney's side that needs to get that information. Jamie doesn't need to know anything from Britney. And
Right.
so he's just like, I don't have any questions. I'm ready for trial right now. Here's my fees, haven't paid. And Rosengart's like, no, 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 no. We're
Right.
not going to even set any completion date. We're just telling you we think by July we'll have our info. And if we don't have our info, then it'll take longer. And we're not going to go to trial till we have it.
Okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, they're all going to come back in July. And most likely, or it is likely that it won't be Matthew Rosengart won't be finished with his investigation and his questions and gathering all of the information that he actually needs to make his case. So it could and will likely be not even beyond July that they actually end up even getting a date set for the real trial. So this could drag on into 2023 easily.
It absolutely will. So if miraculously Jamie and TriStar and anybody else that Rosengart needs info from cooperate, then sure, they'll have all the information by July. But we know they're not going to cooperate.
They
And so
haven't cooperated.
Exactly. So it'll go, my guess is more towards the fall is by the time all of that, because it's easy for a witness to say, I ain't answering your questions. I'm not providing it. I object. And then there's a slow process to get to court for a judge to say, I'm ordering you to respond. So they're going to play that game by, the fall. Hopefully all that's worked out. And then what they do is go back to Penny and they say, give us a trial date. And that takes us now probably to our second talking point is,
Mhm.
Judge Penny is said at the hearing, and this was a really good takeaway, is that, hey, I, Judge Penny, can't hear such a long case in my courtroom. Well, we're going to send it out to what's called a long cause court, which are judges that are specially assigned just to hear trials. They don't have any law in motion like pretrial stuff on their calendars, just trial to trial to trial. So it'll be a new judge. And Penny's not going to send it to a long cause court till she's convinced, like, hey, everybody has all their info, they're ready to go, because otherwise it's not ready to send. And once it gets sent out, we got to get on that judge's calendar. And that definitely is going to be several months out. They don't just walk over there same day. So that takes us into 2023. And it's good to have a judge who has nothing to protect, that wasn't involved in the decision making, because this also came out during the hearing where Weingarten was saying, hey, Judge Penny, Rosengart is basically saying you're responsible. And because all of these things that he's complaining about were done under your watch and with your approval, Judge Penny. And Rosengart,
Didn't
and
Weingarten even go so far as to say Matthew Rosengart, I'm paraphrasing, is disrespecting the court and disrespecting your honor by even questioning that it could have possibly been improper, something that happened in here.
yeah,
Didn't he even go so far as to say something along those lines?
that's what he's doing, and it's a good strategy for his side. And I think that there's even people that, we've responded to, tweets and stuff about, like, why isn't Rosengart, kind of attack the court? And it's like, it's easy for us to do because we don't represent Britney and we're not there trying to convince Judge Penny of anything. But if we were, we got to be super careful, because Judge Penny has a lot of power in what they call discretion and what to rule on, amount of fees or continuances, you name it. So Rosengart is a very good lawyer. And so he's going to come in with this very traditional, the court can't do anything wrong, very respectful. And he's sitting there yelling he's calling Jamie a criminal and Weingarten a horrible person to his face. But to Judge Penny, there can be no criticism. And whether he believes that or not doesn't matter. What matters is trying to appear in the best light possible for his client. And that's why he's not going to attack Penny. And Weingarten picked up on that. And that's why he's trying to put that argument onto Weingarten. He said, don't be fooled by this guy. He
Mhm.
really thinks that you Judge Penny screwed this up. So he tried to lay
Yeah,
that argument on him.
he sure did. I remember that. So tying, number 1 and number 2 talking points together here, after they so first of all, it's probably not gonna be July. They're probably gonna push it back to finish discovery. And then whenever that date is gonna be, then Judge Penny is basically going to relinquish her presiding over this case and kind of hand it to another judge to decide these main big issues that predominantly seem just to have to do with fees, but we'll get into exactly what those are in a moment. So, am I understanding that correctly? It's like, okay, first, July, we're going to go into court, but don't really expect that anything major is going to happen. They're just going to probably ask for more time on Britney's side. And then once they do finally finish discovery, they're going to get pushed to a different courtroom, perhaps even different courthouse. I don't know. And then we'll have to wait at least a few months. So, this is going to be the timeline, at least a few months by the time we even get a date that's going to be that the court's going to actually hear the case.
That
Am I understanding that correctly?
That's absolutely right, that courtroom has to have availability, and we like to have day-to-day trials. So, just if we need 2 weeks, we want a solid 2 weeks, not just a day here and a day there. So, they have to have that band of time open up in that court's calendar, and then all the attorneys are super busy, and they've got witnesses, and we got, like, how many, 10 lawyers or something in the show up at this trial. So there's a lot of calendars. It definitely puts us into 2023.
So we are going to be saving individual questions for the end, but Claire did ask a question I think would help us understand this a little better. Are the long cause courts any more public than the Stanley Moss Courthouse in Brenda Penny, or is it kind of all the same thing?
Yeah, it's all the same thing. So basically what it is that you got to imagine the LA court system is gigantic, and there's hundreds of judges in all these departments, and you have the presiding judge and the supervising judges who manage. They're just managers. And so they need time for trials, so they've created what are called long cause courtrooms just to be able to handle these, because if you need 2 weeks solid day to day of court time, you can't have that in a Judge Penny courtroom when she's managing sometimes 10 or 15 cases coming in.
Right.
You would never
I
get any
remember
trial time.
Judge Penny saying, whenever the lawyers were kind of bickering about what the dates should be and all that, she kind of said, "Look, listen, guys, all of this arguing is probably for no reason." This is paraphrasing, because I have to check 3 different calendars
Yeah.
before I can even tell you what I'm even gonna be able to, like, I have to look at 3 different calendars. And so does that kind of speak to what you're saying right now? It's like she has calendars for all kinds of different issues. It's not just trials, or actually it's not trials at all, it seems, right?
Yeah, that's right. So normally if, the court might have 5, 10, 15 minutes per matter, and it's just like boom, 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 get it in and out. And here they're going to say, I need 2 weeks solid. And there's no way you fit that into Judge Penny's courtroom because she's managing all these other probate matters. So yes, it'll go to a different judge, and it'll be just as public as any other courtroom is in Stanley Mosque or in the LA Superior Court, meaning probably for us in the public, show up in person.
So I was about to say, it seems like from everyone's perspective, it's a good thing. Hold on, let me take this down. It seems like it's a good thing that this is not going to be heard finally by Judge Penny. Could it be a bad thing for any of the parties involved in this case that Judge Penny will not be presiding over the case, or is it just totally unanimously good for everyone?
Well, I think it's good for Britney's side for sure, because to the extent that Judge Penny would want to protect her own rulings in the past and not look bad, and that just natural bias that we have towards not wanting to look bad,
Yeah.
we get rid of that with new judge, and that would then mean that move is bad for Jamie, because he wants to, just like we saw Weingart do. He wants to say, "Hey, this was all approved by you, Judge Penny." So he wants to keep Penny, but it's gone. It's going to a different judge now.
Do you think the different judge will have a tendency to treat this case fairly or with a bias? Or, I mean, I know you can't really, I don't know if you can speak on anything like that, but like,
Yeah, I mean, there's some good judges and there's some bad judges,
so it'll depend
and
on the judge. We don't know
yeah,
yet, right?
yeah.
Okay. So there's questions around whether or not, we saw TMZ reporting on this, page 6 maybe it was, whether or not Jamie is going to try to make Britney sit for a deposition, which if you don't know what a deposition is, it's a part of the discovery phase where the opposing lawyer on the other side gets to sit down and ask you questions, and these depositions can last 8 hours, sometimes days, sometimes several days of 8 hours depending. And so, it would be pretty ridiculous for them to depose Britney just because, it's cruel. But do you think it's possible they do depose Britney, or if that's something we should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think that there was a lot of uproar about that story. Why are they going to take her depo? This is harassment. Leave her alone. And I get all that, but it's no big deal. It's just
It's
some
almost
questions.
it's almost like is it like expect it sounds like to hear you say it, it's kind of like that was obvious she was going to get deposed, or is it
Yeah.
just so routine?
I mean, the other side is asking, in total for over $2 million in attorney's fees that her, former estate pay. And she's saying, I ain't paying any of those. And that's what creates the court dispute. And they
Yeah.
have a right to ask her, like, why aren't you paying them? Or what information do you have to show that these are not due? They have a right to ask for that information. So that there's nothing unusual about that. And I know we're all protective of Brittany and don't want to see her harassed and all that. And the reason why I think they probably want to take the deposition is not that very basic fact finding. Because it was leaked in this way, it's to try and shame and humiliate and embarrass and upset. And that's what people are reacting to. The reason why I say it's no big deal, because Matthew Rosengard's going to be there and he can just say, hey, time out. That question's out of line. You're harassing her, right, Weingarten, and I'm suspending the deposition. I've done this many a time. I'm
So
suspending
you're
the deposition.
saying you're saying you've done that before. I think we talked about this. I'm having a little bit of deja vu now that we're talking about this. You're saying you've been in depositions before where your client was being, harassed or mistreated, and you ended the deposition, and that's something lawyers can do and Rosengart can also do?
Yeah, he can. I mean, there's always a risk of sanctions, so, we don't wanna push the line, but basically, if it's there's harassing going on, and it won't stop, we just say, "Hey, I'm stopping the deposition, I'm gonna make a motion for protective order and walk out the room," and or leave the Zoom. It'll all be by Zoom, it's not gonna be in person.
And
So,
so if some of the reasons why he could do that could be if they're pushing a certain line of questioning that's really out of line and irrelevant, for example, right? Or
yeah.
if they are just truly bullying her, um, is there anything else that, is like a good reason to end a deposition, or is it all just kind of case by case?
Yeah, it's mostly that repeated line of questioning on something that's so far out of line and personal that has nothing to do with the issues in the case. The issues here are very narrow. I mean, it's just about the fees that are being sought by all these lawyers, and I don't know if there's anything else in the final accounting. So the scope of questions that are proper at a deposition are framed by the issues that are in dispute. So the
Mhm.
issues in dispute are, hey, these attorneys want their fees paid. And Rosengart's coming back and saying, no, the fees should not be paid because the services were not performed at all, or were not legal services such as the media matters, or that there was conflicts of interest or fraud happening. Brittany herself has some information about that, but mostly was unaware of it because it was being done behind her back. So she honestly doesn't have a whole lot to contribute towards this in with respect to the fees by, Vivian Thoreen or Ingham or whatever. All she can say is like, hey, I talked to my lawyer. This is what I know. Depending on what she's going to disclose about that. But I was under a conservatorship. I didn't know I was being surveilled.
Right.
So it's really it's not a whole lot that they can legitimately ask her, and Rosengart will be there to protect her. So I'm not worried at all about Jamie's the one that needs to be worried about being deposed. We
Mhm.
should not really be so worried about Brittany being asked some questions. We saw her speak twice, June 23, July 14th. She'll just fine speaking about what happened.
So what you just said, I think, is there are lots of issues, that these parties can disagree on. But as far as this deposition goes, as far as this thing we're talking about right now, it is basically limited to just questions about the accounting because that's what's at issue here. So, what if Britney wants to sue Jamie for something else or some TriStar or another party for something else? What would that look like? And which route would that take in a civil way? You know, there's obviously criminal implications here, but Britney
Yeah.
herself has rights of action, causes of action against some of these players, presumably. No.
Yeah. And we're going to see that, and that's our I think our fifth talking point is that, what are the issues presently facing the probate court? Very limited, just about these attorneys' fees, and in the scope of things, it's a very minor piece that she's
Hmm.
saying, I don't want to pay those fees. I think we're going to see some lawsuit by her against everybody. And the question there is, in what form does that happen in this probate action that still exists, even though there's no probate over her? Um, no powers over her anymore, but the case is still active.
Hmm.
So do they go into that case and make claims there to basically set aside all these transactions that have occurred? And that she has the right to do that. She can go back and say all of those orders, all of those payments that were ordered previously in fees, all the transactions the court approved, I want to set them aside because I've learned of fraud or conspiracy. She could do that in probate court, or she might try and do it in a separate civil action. And that's something I'm sure her lawyers are thinking about. And there's a time in which they have to do that, but she may have 3 years, 4 years potentially to go after that, depending on what she sues for. So Rosengard's very smart. He's using their fee application, because Brittany's technically on the defense right now. It's them asking for fees from her. So
Hmm.
Rosengard is saying, okay, I'm gonna oppose all that, and I want your deposition. I want all this stuff, and he's gathering all that information, and then he's going to turn around and use it in his own offense against them in some separate action later. So that's definitely coming.
And so, I guess I do want to get back to this point about Jamie possibly taking the fifth. So I know like a lot of y'all have probably heard the phrase, pleading the fifth, I plead the fifth, take the fifth. What that really is it has to do, it pertains to the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution, but it really basically stands for the proposition that you cannot be compelled to testify against yourself in a trial. But that's supposed to apply only to criminal things, right, Christopher?
Yeah, yeah. So this is something I've been thinking about, and it's super important to see because it's going to play out. And so, at least in the United States, if you have no obligation to give evidence against yourself that may lead to you being put in jail. And so you have this privilege against self-incrimination where you can just say, I ain't answering that question. And that applies in the field. If you're contacted by law enforcement, it applies in any court proceeding, civil or criminal. And here we have Rosengard, who, said there's criminal conduct over there by Jamie. So Jamie's certainly at risk of being prosecuted. And in the course of these fee hearings, there's questions that are going to come up about, did you keep your daughter under surveillance? Why did you do this transaction? Was that fraud or not? That could be a criminal fraud prosecution. So Jamie is, I'm sure, going to be advised by his criminal counsel, don't you say a word. Don't answer one of those questions, because once he answers that question, then as the criminal defense attorney, we have to sit there and come up with some defense that accounts for the statement that our clients made. If our client hasn't made any statement, well, then we got a free hand to create a better defense potentially. But if he's given a statement, the defense attorney is really locked into creating a story that takes account for that statement.
So is it possible that Jamie can just say, I plead the fifth to any question that they ask, and he can really not be compelled to answer any questions?
Well, he'd have to answer his name, so there's some basic
Yeah, his
questions you have to
address.
answer, and so there has to be a reasonable likelihood that the answer to that question could lead to a criminal prosecution or
Okay.
implicate him, and so, certainly, if they're like, "Did you keep your daughter under surveillance?" Well, that directly would implicate him criminally. Or, why did you buy this property from the estate or sell it to the estate or lease it? All these transactions that seem self-interested and potentially fraudulent, he can say, well, I'm taking the fifth. Now, that doesn't mean though that he escapes justice. So two little pieces of that. One, since it's a privilege against self-incrimination, the court can't punish him for exercising a constitutional right. They can't say, "Hey, you exercise that right, therefore I'm going to find that you're guilty or committed fraud or committed the surveillance." Can't do that. But they also are not going to stop the train. They're going to say, "Hey, if you don't want to testify, that's your right. Whatever, you do what you're going to do over there, Jamie. But we're going forward with or without you."
Mhm.
And now we have testimony from the whistleblower that says, yeah, this all happened. And we have Jamie who is not, who's being silent, let's say, and he's now explained the other side. So we have one side story against nobody. And that's going to, I would imagine the judge is going to say, well, we don't have any counter evidence from Jamie. So he could very well lose on the civil side. And what does he care? These fees are not going to Jamie. They're going to lawyers. He'll
Right,
throw
so
those
why does
guys
he
under the
care?
bus and
Yeah.
back over them.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. I haven't really thought about that, really, like, registered that myself. Like, this is not Jamie fighting for Jamie. It's all the lawyers just, like, using Jamie as a front to fight for money. Like, this is all just they'll throw him under the bus, really. I mean, you've already seen Loeb and Loeb kinda throw Brittany under the bus. Like, I don't know. We'll get into that too, about how Alex Weingarten said in open court that the reason Brittany got put into this conservatorship was because she was irresponsible with money, but that we'll get to that. Another question, again, I wanted to wait for questions, but this is a good one. What is the logic behind Alex Weingarten's proposal to get Brittany's deposition before Jamie's? I haven't seen that, but I'm assuming Nina read that somewhere or it's being reported somewhere. What would be
Yeah.
the strategy there?
So I
As
think
far as the order of when you depose people.
yeah, so I understood the letter or the leak or TMZ story was actually the opposite, that they were saying Jamie's depot would go first, followed maybe the same week by Britney's. So I think that they were conceding that the sequencing would be Jamie first, then Britney. And the law doesn't provide for sequencing, but there's a practice that whoever served or made the demand for depot first gets to go first if because these all like we say we're taking your client's depot and we want it on March 15th or whatever, and then it never happens. It always gets continued because of scheduling, but we may usually, as a matter of practice, maintain our sequencing. So Rosengart came out first saying, I want Jamie's depot, and then it was Weingarten or whoever afterwards said, no, I want Brittany's also. So the practice is going to be Jamie first, then Brittany. And what I understood that letter was is they wanted the Britney's depot to happen soon thereafter. But like I say, Rosengart's going to do whatever he's going to do. He's going to say, look, we're going with Jamie and we'll figure out Britney later. And there's no reason they have to happen in the same week. That's kind of silly, actually.
So, is it possible that this trial, pertaining to the fees and the administration of the conservatorship, could actually end up overlapping in time with a future trial, when Brittany sues these people?
Well, that's a great point that I hadn't thought about. And I think Rosengart would be smart to hold off. I mean, if he has 4 years, let's say, to sue Jamie and others, he may want to wait till close to year four and until all of this stuff is done, because what you're raising would not work as well for him, which could be a consolidation. And so I think, at the moment seems like he wants to deal with this fee thing just to
And kinda
extract a whole
get it
bunch of
out of the
info.
way, right?
Yeah,
Because 'Cause
get
I'm
all
thinking,
that.
like, if I'm Rosengart, do I really wanna consolidate all of this abuse and, the horrible rights violations that, Britney's, dad or family or whatever committed on her. Do I really want to combine that with fee petitions when all these lawyers are going to be fighting against me because they have a personal interest in it beyond
Yeah.
just protecting their client? I think if
Yeah.
I'm Rosengart, I don't want them consolidated. What do you think?
That's right. I think you don't wanna have all those cases now joined into one because that's what the court would wanna do. Because its interest is like, we don't wanna give away court time and, unnecessarily. So they're like, "Hey, you guys all hate each other. You got all these interconnected issues. You'll just have one big mega trial. We'll just set that up for 4 weeks and just get the whole damn thing over with." So that's what the court would wanna do. Rosengart wants to piecemeal it, and it's also death by a thousand cuts too. Like, you're gonna bleed this guy dry. Like, Weingart I'm sorry, yeah, Weingarten, I don't know who
That's
the hell who
Jamie's new lawyer.
Jamie's new lawyer, I can't imagine he's being paid, and so
Okay, that's actually okay. Let's break that down a little bit. I was wondering that while I was sitting in court, trying not to make any gestures or noises. What are the chances Alex Weingarten, does he believe oh, I guess you can't get in his mind, but like, what are the chances this man's getting paid? Because to me, it seems like the precedent is pretty clear. Like, Jamie is going to have to pay him out of his own money, right?
yeah. Yeah, I've been trying to understand that also, and hopefully for Weingarten's sake, he took some kind of deposit or something when he signed up Jamie as a client. But certainly Brittany's not paying him a dime. And I know Weingarten said or threatened to go into court to ask for some advance on attorney's fees to,
Well, he
proceed.
did. He was
Yeah.
asking for an advance, right? On January 19th.
Yeah, so he's saying, he's citing some case law or saying, this is necessary. Now, it might be if the conservatorship still existed because the conservator needs, to have legal representation and deal with all this stuff. So fine. But there's no conservatorship. There's no reason. And he got involved really at the end of the thing. So I don't see a great chance of the court ordering any advance of fees. Brittany certainly ain't going to pay anything. Jamie, isn't going to pay anything. So this guy's basically working for free and
Is there a
very odd.
reason you can think of that a lawyer who knows that it's unlikely that they're gonna get paid would work? I mean, is that an obvious question? I don't.
Yeah, so we've seen some lawyers attach themselves to cases for publicity exposure purposes. We've seen
Oh,
some lawyers create a whole career around that. Now that and so it can work, but you got to be on the side that they kind of like like I can understand,
yeah.
but this is like if he's going to be remembered, it's in a very negative light. So if it
Yeah.
was for publicity, I think he could have, done better.
Yeah, okay, well, so some weird publicity stunt, or maybe he somehow thinks he's getting paid? I really don't know. Okay. So, speaking of him, we heard in court Alex Weingarten, Jamie's lawyer, his new lawyer, say that he would like, or he kind of threatened, and he said that he would be filing to unseal records in Brittany's case. I've seen a lot of people imply that he necessarily meant medical records. It does seem like that he could have been saying that. I don't know. Sometimes the nuance is lost on me. What was your impression there? And could you speak to health records? There's been some disagreement on this channel in the comments about HIPAA and who is actually bound by HIPAA and what that even is. So could you speak to any of that, Christopher?
Yeah, so Weingarten during the hearing said, and this is so odd. So he first accuses Rosengart of leaking information to the New York Times for the documentary on Hulu about the surveillance, and saying that why he said Rosengart was taking information that was sealed in these conservatorship proceedings, leaking it to the press, making Jamie look bad, and Jamie can't defend himself because that information that he needs to defend himself is also sealed, and that he's fighting, with his hands tied behind his back. So we wanted to unseal the information so he could leak it to the press. I mean, it's a freaking bizarre argument, but that's what he was saying.
So
Rosengart,
just so
yeah.
I understand, does Alex Weingarten himself as a human, like as a person, as a lawyer, he has access to all the conservatorship files, right? So he really wants it unsealed, not so he can see it, but so that you, like you said, maybe someone can leak it to the press or we can buy the document and find it. That's kind of what his motivation seems to be.
Yeah, it's very odd because he's not a PR guy. He's an attorney in an active court case. And if the court sealed records, then it needs to be sealed. And no lawyer should be saying, I need to unseal those so I can share them with the press. The press is not part of the action. That says nothing to do with the court. And it's improper, I think, just as a lawyer to come in there and saying, like, I need this information so I can do my PR thing. So, but that's exactly
So
what he
yeah,
was
he was
saying.
like, "Look at all the people in here. The public deserves to know." And I was like, "Sit down."
It was very, very odd. Rosengart lost his mind at that point, was just like,
He
saying
took it
like, I
so
didn't
personally because it was
yeah,
personal.
he got really mad. And and then he said, the first time I learned about the surveillance when I watched the documentary along with everybody else. So he's saying that ain't any part of sealed file,
Mhm.
which of course it wasn't because they were trying to keep it secret. They're not going to file it with the court.
Right,
So,
right.
and so Weingart, at least at that hearing, did not say what records he wanted. It was Rosengart that attributed to Weingarten that it was health records. He said, no loving dad would want his child's health records to be released, to embarrass his child and all that stuff. So we don't know. I didn't hear exactly from Weingarten's own mouth, like, I want Britney's health records. But my
I did
sense
not
is that
either.
yeah, my sense is that the lawyers had talked about it earlier, that Weingarten might have expressed that, and that's why Rosengart was saying, "Look, what you're really looking for is health records." Again, those are not gonna see the light of day. Nothing to worry about, because as we've established earlier, the only issue at this hearing or trial is about the fees, and nothing in her health records would really justify whether the fees would be awarded. So I don't see that's even relevant to the fees. And if it is somehow relevant to the fees, it'll definitely remain sealed. I'm not a big fan of sealing records. I don't like records being sealed in cases, but there are situations like your health records where it's like your interest in keeping your health information private overrides the public's interest in knowing. The financial records probably should have never been sealed. Those are probably improperly sealed, and some of us would like to probably see those ourselves. So if the financial records were unsealed, then fine, go and unseal them, but not her health records.
And speaking of weird threats, we also heard Brittany's former lawyer, Samuel D. Ingham III, former court appointed, court imposed counsel, that it seemed like he was threatening to disclose maybe like emails or texts between him and Brittany, like basically unseal them or basically take away the lawyer client privilege attached to those. Could you speak a little bit to that
That
veiled
was
threat?
Yeah, it was very subtle, and as a lawyer, I picked up on it. And basically, where this came up in is Ingham was there, and no written opposition had been made to Ingham's fee application before January 19th. So Ingham comes in kind of playing dumb, saying like, "Well, hey, I'm just here to get my check because nobody's opposed my fee application."
Yeah, he was
So
definitely playing dumb. That is
yeah,
exactly
so
what he was doing. Like,
so I'm
no one
assuming,
opposed it. Like,
yeah,
sir, like, don't act like you didn't see this coming."
yeah. So it's like, just mail me the check. And Rosengart's like, no, 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 slow down. We haven't got a chance to oppose that, but
And
we
he's
are
with
definitely opposing it.
and Sam Ingham is asking for 3 years worth of fees, right? 2018 to 19, then 19 to 20, 20 to 21. Um, so is it the case that 80% of his fees have already been paid and this is just 20%?
So somewhere on the 80/20 deal where they just said, hey, just, because you can't run to court every day that you incur a charge or every month or whatever like that. So somewhere on this 80/20 deal where it just said, hey, if you bill something, we're going to pay 80% right out the bat, or the conservator of the estate is authorized by court order to pay 80% of these bills that come in, and the other 20%, you're going to have to convince the court and apply for it. Ingham had this retainer where he was getting this absurd amount of money every month. And so we got that money. And now he's saying, well, my bills were actually higher than this advance that I got, so I need this extra money. Now, the thing is that he I think he's too late because he filed these fee applications after he was removed. And so I think he needed to apply before he was removed. So there's a
Oh, is that
technical issue
right?
there.
Oh, we got a
Yeah.
technicality that might work on our side for once.
Yeah, there's Rosengart hasn't raised that, but there is some precedence there to say that he needed to apply because Ingham has no standing. He only had standing when he was her attorney. And so as Britney's attorney, when he was her attorney, he had standing to make fee applications on her behalf or even on his own behalf. Once he was fired, he lost standing. He's just some guy that used to be an attorney. So
Uh-huh, and so
I'm
how
hoping.
that reminds me of something else. Sam Ingham seemed to be a bit miffed that he wasn't being included in all the new filings, like, on the service list, and he
Yeah,
was like, "Can I be added back to the attorney portal for this case
yeah.
so that I just automatically get." Was that an appropriate request for him to make? Have you seen things like that happen before, or does he need to not have access to all the case files anymore?
Yeah, that's a good pickup there because that's the way the court viewed him as saying former attorney for. And so once you're a former attorney, you're out. You're not entitled to notice. You don't get these privileges on this attorney portal that we have that we can look into this, case file and grab documents for free. And and you're not entitled to service of all the paperwork that's going back. So Ingham and a couple other lawyers have complained saying like, look, since we're our fee requests are being opposed now, we're being told that we're going to be part of this big old trial. Number one, we need to be served with all the papers so we know what's going on. That's definitely true, at least as it relates to these fee applications. And then Ingham, it is almost like being a cheapskate. He's just like, yeah, I really don't want to pay for, the $5 to download these records. So I want on the portal. I want access to the portal, which is
That's what
free.
I was
It's like,
thinking, and I had to try very hard not to make
yeah,
any glitches or
yeah,
flinches, or else, Officer Lee might kick me out the courthouse. But I was so mad whenever he said, like, I took that personally because I was like, if you had any idea how much of my
yeah,
own money that I have spent on these court documents and how much of Free Britney movement, all of our own money that we worked very hard to earn, that we've spent on these court documents, and now that you finally actually have skin in the game, you don't
yeah.
have $5.27 to download a document every couple weeks. Like, after he's made like probably millions and millions of dollars,
Oh
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
I just,
yeah.
Chiefs. Yeah, exactly. I felt the
That
same way. I'm glad you confirmed that.
Yeah, and now to the veiled threats. So Ingham says, "Okay, I'm really surprised my fee application's being challenged." And he says, "I really want to make sure I protect Brittany and, I'm going to try my best not to reveal any of the communications that I've had with her when when I'm responding here to whatever your objections are, Mr. Rosengart." And that's lawyer speak to basically saying that when we go after a client or former client for fees, the client says, no, I'm not going to pay you, lawyer. Well, there's an exception under the law now to the attorney client privilege. Normally everything that the attorney and client say to each other is totally secret, top secret, can't ever be revealed. But one of the exceptions is really for self-defense. So if the client sues the lawyer or says, I'm not paying you, then the lawyer really has very difficult to justify their bill unless they say, well, yeah, this is what we talked about. This is our fee arrangement. This is the services that I provide. These are the instructions that I got from the client.
Mhm.
And so what he was saying there is like, hey, I have a right to self-defense. I can reveal information that would otherwise be privileged. And because I'm such a nice guy and I like Brittany so much, I'm going to try not to embarrass her when I do that. Veiled threat.
Yeah, totally veiled threat, and like kind of a sleazy thing to do considering Sam Ingham, of all the people, knows exactly firsthand or secondhand, what Brittany has gone through, what this team has put her through, and he knows what they're capable of. And so to kind of dogpile like that, in my opinion, like I felt like that was just kind of inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that the court will look at that even though he has the right to reveal some stuff. If he goes overboard, he would actually violate his professional responsibilities. So he has to be very careful with that. But I think it was the way I took it, and again, it was very quick and subtle, but it
Mhm.
was lawyer speak over to Rosengart saying, you may not want to challenge this thing, but we're way beyond that. Anyone's going to look bad. And this is why I'm not worried about it. Anyone's going to look bad. It's going to be Ingham and Jamie and the lawyers. Brittany has nothing to fear.
Well, that is good. I saw a couple other people kind of saying in the chat that that is reassuring. So that helps. Thank you for that. I do want to get to a few questions. We're running rather long, but I think that this was very necessary to get through all these points because it really lays out where we are in the case and where we're going to be heading. And I think in a way that's very comprehensive. So thank you very much for that. So I have a few questions from the last live that I did, and I want to ask you here because they kind of stumped me or I just didn't really know how to answer them. So thank you for coming. I'm so happy you're here, and let's see what the first one was. Okay. Sorry, I don't remember who asked these, y'all. If it was you, just put your name down there. The first one is what about this sealed termination plan, right? Jody and her lawyer kind of like wrote up this mysterious plan that is going to be sealed. Let's talk a little bit about whether or not you think it's even appropriate that that's being sealed. Or maybe you can say, like, what even is a termination plan? What's going on with all of that?
So my understanding is that this is very unusual and there was no need for any kind of plan for the termination. Everyone agreed that the conservatorship was not needed and it should have just ended. My guess is that this came about before it became so clear that it was going to be terminated, and that he had the burden to convince Judge Penny, we're going back, before November, but he had the burden to convince Judge Penny to say, I want you to terminate this. And my guess is that he proposed a plan to the court to saying, look, Brittany wants this over and she'll continue working on a voluntary basis or whatever with Jody Montgomery. She'll use this, a business manager. She'll do, whatever, like to just show that don't be concerned, Judge, if you take away these powers over my client because she has this great plan going forward that's protective of her. So you should feel
Oh,
comfortable. That's my guess is where it originated. And then all of a sudden it became a plan that's being filed with the court and orders entered being on it. And since we can't see it, at Brittany's request, or at least Rosengart's request, it's all sealed because it contains all this private information allegedly about her health and her kids and all this stuff that, we then wonder, it's like, well, is there some orders in there that require her? Maybe it says you're required to go to counseling. You're required to use Jody Montgomery. You're required to do something. And, you
and
know,
Judge Penny's reasoning for sealing it, I've talked about on my channel before. There's kind of like four big requirements that all have to be met before you seal something that the public has a right to from the public. And three of the requirements were just patently not met. And you needed, enough weight for, you need to distribute over the four requirements. And she just basically said, from what I understood, and that's why I wanted to have you on, from what I understood, Judge Penny just basically said, Britney's really super famous. So for that reason alone, the public doesn't have the right to see this stuff that they otherwise should have the right to see.
well, she did say that there was information about her health care in there and her children, and
So
that
can I ask you
yeah,
why those parts couldn't be redacted so that would be narrowly tailored and the least restrictive
yeah.
means
No, I agree,
as
and
is
and that's
required by
that's it.
requirement 2 and 3? Or is it three
I
and
agree.
four? I don't
I
know.
agree. That's what I would have expected, and for the document to have, like it could say, like Brittany will confer with her doctor, and then we would just black that part out, so we don't know
Or
who her doctor
even
is.
Brittany will confer with whoever. Like, we know it ain't gonna say Jamie Spears. Like,
Exactly. But here's the thing,
they're not
if
letting
any
us
of us
see anything. None of it.
well,
The whole thing is sealed, right?
the whole thing, and any member of the public can challenge an order sealing a document in a California court. But here we would be acting adverse to apparently what Brittany wants, because according to Rosengart, she wants this sealed. So I wouldn't be the one filing that. But you know, like as everything with life, we need to have faith in something. And you know, my faith is that Rosengard is protecting her and doing what he thinks is best for her, even though maybe this is unusual and we don't like that we can't see it. But I have nothing else to operate on.
Yeah, fair. Okay. So the termination plan, it was kind of speculated, someone speculated last time, like maybe it just has like people who she could go to. And it seems like that's what you're saying, right? Like there's certain doctors. Look, Judge Penny, here's the doctors, here's where she's going to be going, here's how many times. So you shouldn't be worried about letting Britney out of this conservatorship because she has all this stuff in place and she's set to go. So that's kind of what you think is possibly in the termination plan, stuff like that.
That's right.
Okay. So the next question that was raised on my last live was um let's say Judge Penny for some reason does unseal all the records in the conservatorship case. Not the medical records. You already said unequivocally that is not going to happen. So that's not going to happen. But let's say Judge Penny makes a decision or a ruling on whether or not to let those records be open. Can either side, either Jamie's or Brittany's, appeal that decision, or is that a decision that's not appealable?
So it would go the Court of Appeal, which is a higher level court than the LA Superior Court, can review on request a decision like that. It wouldn't be a traditional appeal. It what we call a petition for writ review. And so yeah, technically you could go up to that higher court and saying like, hey, that thing should not have been unsealed and should remain sealed. And the Court of Appeal might get involved. This is a mystery of what cases they decide to take up. But yeah, there is an opportunity for writ review of that decision. And certainly it just depends on how serious the information is, because once it's made public, you can never get it back. So,
Right, right.
and it wouldn't be Jamie, because Jamie's personal info was never involved. It was all Britney. So the only person who would be complaining about unsealing would be Britney. And that would be like her medical records. And I got to think, I would hope, I hate predicting Court of Appeal stuff because I'm always wrong, but it's, that they would say, yeah, we're not going to allow healthcare records to be unsealed, even if the LA Superior Court judge thought it was a great idea.
So speaking of appeals, would you like to take this opportunity to speak briefly about where your appeal on behalf of USA Today stands? Earlier, for new people to the channel, Christopher actually represented USA Today in trying to make these Britney's hearings, the court hearings, open to the public by way of a remote audio access program that was discontinued the day or 2 days after Britney spoke. So Britney speaks in June. Everybody heard it, right? A couple people did share it, which that was against the rules. But then almost immediately they shut the program down. Christopher C. Melcher, on behalf of USA Today, basically sued, I guess that's the way to put it, right? You sued the court and said, you have to let us in. You have to, because we're in a pandemic, and he had all these great reasons. I have a video on it if y'all want to go watch it. But the court basically said, no. And then you appealed it, right?
Yeah, I took it to the California Court of Appeal, which is the next, our intermediate level supervisory court. They denied it. And then I took it to the California Supreme Court, which is the highest court, state level. And then we had tremendous support of a bunch of media organizations. I mean, there were 10 or 15 media organizations, First Amendment advocates, who wrote in support detailed letters. The California Supreme Court ordered the LA Superior Court to explain itself in a briefing, which was pretty unusual. And with all that support and the order to respond, I thought, geez, this is going to go, but unfortunately, the California Supreme Court said, we're not going to allow this to go further. We don't see anything here worthy of review. They get to make that choice. I really think that was a mistake. It was their opportunity to, make law, because there's no case that I'm aware of in the country that deals with our right as a public to view on a video platform proceedings that the other attorneys and parties can view on a video platform, certainly during the pandemic. And the Chief Justice of the California Supreme Court in California had even did a recommendation saying courts should be doing this now. And so we were saying, like, well, put your money where your mouth is there and take this case. Now, she had recused herself because the attorney for the LA Superior Court at Jones Day had represented the Chief Justice in some other litigation. And so she recused herself from the case. And so there we go. That was the end of the line for us, but not necessarily the end of the world. Definitely would take on a case like that if we had the facts teed up as well as I thought it was. And because it's super important. And you're coming from out of town. I mean, you spend great expense and time to go to these hearings. And we also put our health at risk sitting in a courtroom. And it's demeaning to sit there and give our name and our ID,
It
surrender
is
our phones.
so demeaning, and that
Yeah.
is what I was gonna ask you next, because I have sat now outside of that courtroom for hours and hours and hours for several different days, and the way that they treat you as a member of the public, it's almost like somebody forgot to tell them that they are public servants and civil servants, because they literally treat the people who are just coming to exercise our constitutional right to engage in a constitutionally protected activity as if we have committed a crime. I do not believe that I should have to give my identification in order to exercise my constitutional right to observe a hearing. And somebody told me at the last hearing, it might just be a rumor, that the reason they take our IDs is to run background checks. Is that true, or is that just a rumor?
That can't, I mean, well, there is no legal authority for that. And so the court cannot use any access that it has to those records, or the sheriff's department cannot use any access that it has to criminal information for that purpose. That would itself be a
I saw
crime.
somebody who said that they were a disabled veteran and they didn't have their ID on them and they were not allowed in the courtroom. Like, that feels unconstitutional to me.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was asked for my ID, because there's no basis for that. There's no requirement for that.
And then if
The
you
LA
fight with these people, they just remove you. You don't get any, well, you're not going in a hearing anymore. And
Yeah.
now they know your name.
That's the problem. And if this were going to continue on, it's something that we could potentially challenge. I think that ultimately the LA Superior Court is hostile to public access. We saw that with the remote access program being canceled, and how that much money they spent apparently on Jones Day on legal fees to fight something that they
Could
could
we file
easily
a
flip a
FOIA
switch on.
request to see how much they
Yeah,
spent on legal fees?
yeah,
Maybe that's something worth doing. I need like
that's
a
a good one.
resident FOIA request filer. Comment below
Yeah.
if you want to do that.
Yeah, we may do that. And then, but yeah, so they're hostile. And I think I understand in this particular case, because like for me, going back to my original comment, I see what you put on your videos about how this court treated Britney Spears. And me, again, I'm not, I'm just a fan of the justice system. And I'm looking at this and saying, I'm embarrassed as a LA attorney for my court system to have done this. And
It's
I got to think,
embarrassing.
I think it is embarrassing. So, you don't want, they just don't want to watch. They don't want a lot of people watching this unfold and how embarrassed they should be. And I think that court, if it had any desire to improve and not to do this again, your first step is you got to take accountability. You got to admit we messed this up.
Yep.
And then to learn from that, instead of saying nothing, and then to try and keep people from observing this thing unravel.
I agree completely, but that would require taking accountability, and that's not something that the LA Superior Court or any of the authorities in LA County in general have the ability to do, in my opinion. Okay, so you don't have to agree with that. So I want to do it. I do want to address at least one more question. We're already running a little long here, but there have been a lot of questions about the bond. Jamie's bond and Andrew Wallet's that they had to pay. Now, I know you're not 100% sure about like all the timeline and the chronology of like when it got boosted up to what it is today, But could you speak a little bit just generally about what a bond is and what the purpose is in a conservatorship, why Jamie had to do it? And I will I'll share my screen so that people can see this as well.
Yeah. So and this was super interesting because we know from New York Times reporting that there was this $40,000 loan that Jamie Spears had taken from TriStar or Lou Taylor before the conservatorship started. And that was like, I mean, it's completely improper for him to have that relationship with TriStar and not to have disclosed it. So a lot of self-dealing and conflicts around that. But then we saw some posts questioning, well, maybe that loan of $40,000 was used to fund the fee to obtain this $40 million bond that he needed to be conservator. And it was like, wow, that's super interesting. But then we looked into it pretty quickly. On the screen here, February 2008, right at the beginning of the conservatorship, there was a bond that Andrew Wallet and Jamie Spears had to take on themselves to be appointed a conservator. So, what this means is that when you're a conservator, you have immense powers, as we've seen, and it's a position of trust. And we want to protect the conservatee, Britney. And there's a bond, which is basically insurance. It's an insurance company or somebody else that comes in and indemnifies. It says, hey, if this conservator, proposed conservator, Wallet and Jamie do something wrong, we will step in and pay Britney up to $50,000 because that's the amount of the initial bond to, satisfy any claims against them as conservators. And the court would say, okay, that's protective, at least as to 50 grand. Now, many of these conservatorship estates have nothing in them. So 50,000 is more than enough to cover because they have nothing. And so initially, when they applied to be conservators, they said, hey, I'm an alcoholic and I used to be a caterer and went bankrupt and I want to be the conservator. And look, I've got a $50,000 bond. And the court said, that sounds good to me and appointed him. And the bond fee, and again, we know it got bigger later to 40 million, but initially it
Right.
was a $50,000 bond. And right there, the fee, the premium is $250 a year. So this thing cost almost nothing. So I got to think Jamie Spears and Andrew Wallet, could have fronted that money out of their own pocket because when
Yeah,
they
so it
applied, there was no
wasn't actually the
conservatorship.
case that at the beginning of the conservatorship, they really did need to even give this 40,000. It looks a little suspicious now in retrospect because it's like, oh, they ended up eventually having to do this $40,000 bond securing thing, but that is probably not what that $40,000 TriStar loan was about based on how much they needed to pay up front. Is that correct?
That's right. And thankfully, and I don't know the paper trail on this, but thankfully, at some point, the LA Superior Court said, no, it has to be a $40 million bond. And now that bond fee would be enormous and it would have been paid by the conservatorship of the estate, meaning Brittany's money. But gee, that's the best insurance policy she's ever taken
And
because whatever she paid for that.
do you think it's possible the reason that the bond had to go up was because they started to transfer assets from the trust, which was outside of the conservatorship, into businesses that were a part of the conservatorship?
Well, it's super interesting, and that's one of my little homework assignments, and if anybody has this info already, it would save me some time, but I wanna see the court papers that where the $50,000 bond got turned into a $40 million bond.
Mhm.
Now, I was thinking maybe naively that some judge there thought, "Hey, Brittany needs more protection, and let's make them do $40 million." Even though it cost Brittany a lot of money, it gives her a tremendous amount of protection because they're not letting that bond go, and they're gonna say, "Jamie ripped me off, and now the bond company is gonna pay her $40 million potentially," which is awesome.
Yeah,
But
right.
now maybe if we want to look at cynically, maybe Jamie thought, hey, I'm engaged in bad conduct. I know this is maybe going to come to light someday. I don't want to be out the 6 million that I'm going to skim off of this estate and whoever knows what else he got. So I'm going to now propose as if I'm some beneficial father and conservator. Hey, I need this big bond fee. What does he care? Brittany's going to pay for it anyway. And now
Right.
he's got insurance for his own wrongdoing. Might have
Yeah.
happened that way.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, bonds are a part of this whole thing that kind of confuse me, but they're just sort of like insurance, right? Like you described.
Yeah. Yeah. Insurance for
Okay.
bad conduct. And we'll take it. I mean, it's a great protection for her.
Do you think it's
And
possible that or likely that Britney is able to get any money from this bond policy, or is that just too soon to tell on that?
oh, yeah. I mean, if so she's gotta make the claim because right now she's just saying, "Hey, I don't wanna pay any more money." So the bond company's not involved in that.
Mhm.
But, when it comes to her saying, "And I want a refund. I want to unwind these orders that approve prior accountings. I want my money back that was spent on all these attorneys. I want my property back that was sold." This was all done under the conservatorship. If she shows that that was done at the misconduct of the conservators, then and the court agrees and says, yeah, that's got to be paid back. Then if Jamie doesn't pony up the money, she goes to the bond company. The bond company has to pay that. And then the bond company will go after Jamie, called subrogation. But that's the bond. That's what it's there for. It's an immediate form of payment to protect a conservatee for the misconduct of the conservator. So out of everything that's happened
So that's
during this
like
thing, that was,
exactly what this is for then, right? For whenever they do
yeah.
act poorly or badly or misbehave, whatever, and they are found by the court to have done so, then that's exactly what a bond is for. It sounds like that's what you're saying, right?
It is, and it's the best part of the story because that if she was ripped off $40 million, we have $40 million worth of insurance there that the company would have to pay over.
And so David Stevenson is asking, would this bond question be a separate trial or would it just be decided by this long cause judge? Or could they double dip into the bond like on these fees they find some misconduct, or would that all go off to the second trial of like the main issues?
It's gonna be a separate trial because at this one that we're dealing with right now, the only question is, does Brittany have to pay money to the attorneys?
Mhm.
And so that's not a bond issue. The bond's gonna be implicated when Brittany sues or makes a claim saying, "I want my money back.
Mm,
I want
mhm.
the money back that was
Okay.
paid to these lawyers, and I want my property back that was sold or transferred or stolen." And if the court says, "Yeah, you need to get that back," then and Brittany, you're entitled to, let's say, $30 million. She takes that piece of paper, walks it down to the street to the bond company, and they got to cut her a check for 30 million.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm leaving this conversation feeling very encouraged and optimistic compared to what I was kind of thinking before. I was kind of like freaking out a little bit, but I'm very happy to hear that you actually don't think it'll be a big deal if they have to depose Brittany. It's actually a much bigger deal for Jamie. It's a good thing for Brittany's side that Judge Penny's not going to be overseeing this case ultimately. I did have some questions on Patreon, and they're kind of I'm concerned because we just already do you have a few more minutes, Christopher?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna just share the screen here and maybe I don't know, would you be willing to like come back maybe another time
Oh,
sometime soon to finish answering some of these Patreon questions? The community over there is very active and they have some extremely thoughtful questions. Let me see here. Okay.
always happy to do that. Yep.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Okay, so here we are. Sarah Catherine asks a few questions, and I actually like all these questions. So if you want to answer, I don't know, all of them or take them in turn, or you just think only, you can speak to only one. But so she first says if there was never a diagnosis of dementia and no legal reason for a conservatorship, can Brittany sue the state of California? And what are the consequences to Jamie for providing the false statement that papers would be filed stating Brittany had dementia?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's this thing called sovereign immunity, which, it goes back to English times where you can't sue the king. And, the king makes the rules, and rule one is you can't sue the king. So we've taken some of that into our law, and you can't sue the superior court for what it does. And we've just kind of drawn the line there as our society or whatever is system of laws that we have courts, the courts make decisions, and if they screw it up, they're immune from being sued. Like it or not,
So
that's kind of the
basically,
rule.
no judges in this case will ever, under the current law system of law, will never face any accountability for anything they did on this conservatorship, even if technically it was wrong, legally, ethically, morally, and all that. Just they'll never face accountability for this
Yeah.
because they are immune from accountability.
Yeah, there's not going to be any accountability for the judges or court system. It's just not available, other than exposing it, like we're trying to do here, to saying like, hey, judges made really bad rulings or mistakes or whatever you want to call them, and to bring light to that. So hopefully it doesn't happen to somebody else. But
Yeah.
that's ultimately the end of that. In terms of the false statement by Jamie, when we were originally looking at this, we were wondering, would there be a motion to set aside the and invalidate the conservatorship from the very beginning, that it was done without notice and without counsel, and that was available, it still is. Rosengart didn't do that. He just said, hey, we all agree as of this moment there's no need for a conservatorship, and he never litigated the question of, was there ever a need for it. We just all agreed there wasn't a need for it going forward. So there could be some action on that, but again, the accountability is a rare thing to happen. But as at the moment, Rosengart hasn't made any attacks on why the conservatorship was done in the first place or how it was imposed. He's was focused on just getting her out from under it. So we may see that in later steps.
Okay. Winona, a fellow lawyer, says she believes that she should be able to get CLE credit for this. And I agree. I think I should get CLE credit from you telling me all this stuff. So let's go to our next question. How likely is it that Jamie, Lou, Black Box, or other parties will be found guilty of any criminal charges? And I know you're not necessarily a criminal lawyer, but just to what from what you
Yeah.
think. Um, if they are, what's the route, if any, to seek recourse from the court? Okay, so that question you already just kind of answered. There's really no recourse from the court. It's not going to happen. We want it to happen. It's not going to happen. But what about the
Yeah.
first part?
The
How
the
likely
criminal
is it?
charges.
Go
So
ahead.
So basically, there's a statute of limitations on criminal cases. Most of them are 1 year, some are 3 years, some are longer, and that's the amount of time that the prosecution has to file charges against somebody. And after that time has gone by, you just can't. It's barred. It can't do it. So when I looked at it, it depends on what statutes and they go under, but it may be a 1 year or a 3 year statute. Some of this recording, the surveillance was done earlier than that, so it may not be available. So that's a big
So
issue.
would the statute not toll until a reasonable person would have known about the recording, or it's like really hard and fast, 1 year, 1 year?
Yeah, unfortunately, and we looked into this pretty extensively. There isn't what you're calling a tolling. So some statutes say, if you had no reason to know that you were a victim of this crime, then your time, the prosecution's time to file charges, starts from when the victim knew or reasonably should have known of the crime.
Right.
And that would have made perfect sense for surveillance, because it's like you're doing this without the victim's knowledge. But unfortunately, the law is not that evolved, and they say, it's from the act of recording or interception.
Mm.
But Rosengard's obviously got this background with the U.S. Attorney's Office, so they're looking at it. But I understand that the defense is also, or Jamie and others, Black Box, are
Maybe they're
um,
trying to tack on the surveilling of the Free Britney movement as like a continuation of all of the acts of recording. Because that
yeah.
would have been a year. That would have been less than a year ago.
There are some, sure, some creative arguments that could be made.
Leave it to
If
me.
Yeah, and I think if some prosecution is going to happen, they better get on with it. The fraud, maybe later, because there is some tolling on fraud. So, but that's the problem. So it's not just showing that a crime occurred; it has to be within the time period for which to prosecute.
Okay, well, that answers that very clearly. And then the final question is, can Brian Spears' statements from the Not As Seen on TV podcast, or Jamie Lynn's, perhaps from the podcast she went on, be used as evidence? Yeah, can that be used as evidence, or that's all just hearsay?
Well, so yeah, so it is technically hearsay, which is an out of court statement. offered to prove the truth of the statement. And so where it would show up is if Brian or Jamie Lynn appeared as a witness at a trial or hearing, they can be confronted with their prior statements if they're inconsistent with their testimony.
Okay.
So if Jamie Lynn says
Impeachment
something on the
evidence,
stand,
as it were.
impeachment evidence, yeah. So really the only way it can be used.
Okay, let's see if we have. Um, so Meredith wants to know if we think that they're going to go after everybody. Um, yeah, I mean, if you were strategizing this case, would you be going after certain specific people? I mean, is there some people you would leave out of it? Like the lawyers, for example. Would you even try to go for the like Vivian Letharines and the Geraldines? Or like, is it just easier to go for like Ingham and Jamie? Like, I don't know.
Well,
What could Rosengart be thinking as far as strategy of who to go after? Will
yeah,
it
and
be influenced by Britney? Stuff like that.
well, yeah, so he's coming from the federal side, not the state side. And in federal prosecutions, their method is really divide and conquer. So basically, it's you charge everybody, you charge the wife, you charge the lawyer, you charge the friend, and it puts enormous pressure on the target because they don't want, or the kid, we've seen kids be prosecuted. I'm talking adult children prosecuted. Now the dad or mom are going to take a plea because they don't want their kid going to jail for this enterprise that this family was involved in. So I got to imagine if the federal prosecutors are getting involved, they would go and charge or target multiple people surrounding the target to get the person to crack.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know. I mean, Jamie may be, just the pawn. I mean, obviously he's a bad character in this, but they may want to target Jamie to crack and give evidence against whoever was more masterminding the situation. So they know what they're doing on that, but what they are going to, time is not their friend, because like I say, the clock is ticking on these crimes. And if they're a day late, it's going to get dismissed.
Uh-huh. So they have to move quickly, and most likely they know that, right?
They all know that. They
Yeah.
absolutely all know that. The defense, the targets know that, especially.
So, Janae is asking, can it be proven that Britney was drugged, and how heavily? I guess that's a I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess they can subpoena like medical records, see if they had records of how much medication they gave. I mean, they are
Yeah.
obviously going to be able to ask her for her testimony, or she can sign a sworn statement. How do you prove something like that?
Yeah, so they definitely can get the prescription records, and they would know what prescriptions were filled and how often, and the dosage and the number of pills and all that kind of stuff. So that would give some evidence, especially if it was happening regularly enough. You could kind of backwards engineer it and say, well, this is must have been the regular dosage because they kept fulfilling these prescriptions. So that would be one way of looking at it. Obviously, Brittany's testimony. I think that one sports medicine doctor, I think he died. So
The
I
one who
if I
died, that's Dr. Timothy Benson at West Coast Psychiatric Care, West Coast Counseling Center
so
in
he's not
Encino.
saying anything. So, there may be
But
some records, but
could they use any of Dr. Timothy Benson's findings or notes or reportings? Because, like you said,
yeah,
he's not going to be able to come testify.
yeah,
So is that allowed in court or in
it
in
is.
the hearing?
Yeah, business record or medical record if subpoenaed, and we would just need the custodian of records or whoever is in charge of his record keeping for his prior practice to say, yeah, these are his records, and then those can come in. We just don't know how detailed he, you know,
Would have been or
was. Yeah.
anything like exactly. Okay, well, so kept in the ordinary course of his practice, right? So we can bring all that in. Okay. Could promises is promises I think you mean bridges to recovery. Or maybe it is promises. Could any of these behavioral centers, rehabs, whatever they want to call them that Brittany stayed in, could they be subpoenaed for depositions, or could they be even sued for any of this stuff?
Yeah, certainly they'll have some records, and it just depends on what's in there. But that would definitely be a place that I would be looking at, and hopefully Rosengard is looking at. Where are those records? That's going to be part of the story, and it's very
Mhm.
inexpensive to get this stuff. So I got to imagine he's sending subpoenas to everybody, every provider.
I think so. Okay, opinions on Andrew Wallet. Haven't heard anything about him yet. Resigned. I mean, I don't. This isn't really a legal question, but oh, here it is. Okay, yeah. Could Andrew Wallet face any legal ramifications for his involvement in this apparent scheme? If so, what do you think he's really up against here? I mean, to me, I mean, my opinion, Andrew Wallet seems like he was probably one of the big minds of this thing. Like, it seems like they brought him on because it was clear Jamie was incompetent to be a conservator of an estate by himself. So Andrew Wallet was the other one, but this is just me speculating. I have no idea, right? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's something I've been wanting to look into for a long time. It's just, I got to pick my projects here. But the main concern that I have is that when Wallet left, he was given a full release of all claims, known or unknown, relating
Oh,
to
wow.
conservatorship, and he was paid money to leave. I mean, it was absolutely outrageous that Ingham signed that thing. And so one of the things that's going to happen if any claims are made against Wallet, which they ordinarily could, just the mere fact that you were removed or resigned as a conservator doesn't release you of liability. It just means you're no longer the conservator, but you still have the liability. They gave him a immunity basically,
So,
and Ingham
given
signed
the
off
fact
on it.
that Britney Spears herself didn't sign off on that, is that actually enforceable against her?
Well, that's I have big questions around that, and I think Wallet would definitely be parading that around, saying, "Hey, I got a release," but Brittany was not even capable of signing it legally because her legal rights were taken from her, so she had no legal ability to even sign it. Didn't sign it. It was Ingham who signed it on her behalf, and there's a question of did he have the authority to do that? And that's something that's going to have to be litigated. But to me, I cannot imagine a lawyer who would have advised signing that on behalf of a client. It's absolutely unbelievable that he engaged in that transaction. So that's very worrisome, and could be some issues on the bond because he also had a $40 million bond. So that's definitely something that has to be looked into, and we may see that happening by Rosengart challenging that.
So that was all that we had from the Patreon that I'm gonna be able to get to for tonight. Christopher, I know you have been able to see the chat. Were there any questions that you thought were particularly poignant and you want to bring up here?
Well, so I know one confusion was about this termination and how that she's terminated, she's free. There's like, how do we have a conservatorship case even going on? And that was very confusing for us. And I know you know, people, like I was saying, like actually she wasn't free before January
Your
19th or
most
whatever like that.
recent YouTube video is like Britney's not free,
Yeah, and
technically.
that's right. And we saw some inconsistencies before that about, like, well, Zabel was there, still as a conservator of the estate on a temporary basis after November 12th when the conservatorship ended, you know, because they had this estate planning loose end. And so there was all this in the middle, like she's free, it's terminated, but oh no, but Zabel's still a temporary conservator.
Right,
And
and
she got
Alex
all
Weingarten in court even seems to be like he wanted to make Zabel be even longer in this weird limbo position. He was like, "Oh, I have an idea. Why don't you just give us some time to figure out about the fees, and in the meantime, just keep Zabel as the temporary conservator?" And Judge
well,
Penny was like, "There's no conservatorship. He can't be
yeah,
a conservator of anything."
it was very weird, and basically, and so what we learned at that hearing was John Zabel definitely continued on as a temporary conservator of the estate past November 12th through January 19th, for some limited purposes relating to the estate plan, but he was holding her estate. He was holding her money. There's no question about it because he asked for an order at that hearing saying, I don't want to hold her estate. I want an order directing me where to send it to Britney herself or whoever she, says, and he needed that order. So we knew from that request that he was holding. He said, "I'm holding the estate." So he
Mhm.
was through that date of the hearing, her conservator over the estate, holding her money for some limited purpose, and that's when, in my mind, she was truly free because at that moment we were sitting there, there was a conservator over her estate that was holding her money. And but now to the question about like, well, how could you have anything beyond that? So basically,
Yeah,
what
like, all these
happened?
lawyers are still asking for fees, and
Yeah.
people are like, "How can Judge Penny or this other judge award fees from money that is not technically even like there's no conservatorship, there's no estate, so why are judges still allowed to order Brittany to pay things?"
So some of that was definitely filed before the conservatorship ended. So, some of these lawyers wanted their fees paid and had asked for it before the conservatorship had ended. So the court would have continuing jurisdiction over that to saying, "Hey, we're not gonna delay restoring freedom to Britney Spears because we got some lawyers that say they want to get paid. So we have to restore her freedom." That makes sense. And then we have some loose ends here financially about the attorney's fees we're going to handle later. So that's the vestiges of it's really there's a case for a conservatorship that's open. We have a case number, but there's no powers over her at this point. There's just these claims for fees.
So earlier we asked a different version of Tiffany's question, which was, can the court face accountability or get any kind of trouble because they allowed Brittany to be put in a conservatorship when she didn't have dementia, even though they lied and said she had dementia? So Tiffany asks, if the conservatorship was ordered based on a lie, like the fact that Brittany does not have dementia, and they said she did, could, or she said shouldn't, but I'll rephrase a little bit. Could all the money she paid within the conservatorship be voided and repaid to her if it is somehow found out that it was all based on, I don't know, I guess it would have to be a fraud thing though. And isn't there a statute of limitations there?
Well, absolutely. And this is the move that I thought that Rosengart would use to say, I want to, end the conservatorship, certainly right now, but I also want to invalidate it from day one. We would call in law ab initio, right from the beginning.
Right.
And because it was based on a lie, and it was based and even worse than the lie, without notice to her and without counsel. So I think, due process reasons, you'd have to unwind the whole thing, and therefore all transactions are
And that
invalidated.
seems like the most obvious to me, but what do I know?
Well, that's what I was thinking, but then remember the progression of this. It was actually Jamie who filed the petition to terminate. So Jamie
True.
beat the gun. So before Rosengart, because he's just getting up to speed, he's trying to get the file, and all of a sudden Jamie sees the ship going down. So he says, "Oh, I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to file for termination of conservatorship," and then everyone just basically joined in Jamie's. So, but the right still exists. So under the probate code, the conservatee or former conservatee can challenge after the termination of the conservatorship any of these transactions if they were the result of fraud or conspiracy. And
Mm-hmm.
so here we have allegations of both, and she
And
has
what's the
4 years
statute? Oh, 4 years. 4 years. Okay. So she has 4 years to sue from when though?
termination. Because the reason for that is that her legal right to sue was taken from her in February of 2008 and not restored till
Right.
really January of 2019, the 2022, the way I see it. But so she could not sue. So since her right to sue was taken away, her time limit to sue starts from the time that she was given her rights back. And yes, I see that
Perfect.
question. She can sue Ingham for malpractice. He directly represented her. She can absolutely sue him. And there's generally a 1 year, sometime a 2 year. It's a confusing statute, but she has potentially 2 years from the date that the representation ended. So 1 year or potentially 2 years from November 12th of 2021 to sue Ingham. And then also she could sue the attorneys for the conservatorship estate. They did not represent Jamie, although they acted, it seems as if they did. They represented her estate. And so I think she could sue them also.
So we kind of touched on this earlier about suing him. If he does get sued by Brittany, then it could open up a lot of otherwise privileged or confidential information that right now is totally secret from everyone except Sam and Brittany. And I mean, presumably
Yeah,
Jamie has seen a lot of these communications because he had everything tapped, allegedly.
yeah.
But do you think there's a strategy there to just maybe not go after Sam because he does have the most possible things to hurt Brittany as far as information? Because he's already obviously threatened that based on, we talked about that earlier. We heard him threaten it subtly. Do you think it's worth suing him? Like, what would you sue for? Just his fees back, or?
Oh, I think they should sue him and or consider, and they'll make the decision, but they should sue him for malpractice, breach of fiduciary duty, and recovery of the fees back. And because they don't know all the circumstances, they know enough looks bad, and so hopefully they will pursue that. And the other thing is that in most litigation, people are much more cost conscious about this, and they'll say, I'm not going to sue because I can't afford a lawyer, number one.
Right.
Or, yeah, I can't afford a lawyer, but I'm being offered X amount of dollars and I just got to take that because I can't afford this. Brittany can afford this.
Yep. And
And
she
so
has it on her mind.
she can afford this. And so I got to imagine she's going all in. And to me, order of me being pissed off at people, it's number one is the superior court because it's their job to protect people. Number
Yeah.
two, Ingham, because it was his job to protect his client. Everybody
Mhm.
else has, we're just like, okay, Jamie's Jamie.
Yeah.
He's the villain in the story. Of course he acted bad. But
Yes.
the protectors were supposed to protect, and those are the ones that I'm most offended by.
They're the gatekeepers. They're the ones who are supposed to make sure that the Jamies and the Lou Taylors and the other people in the, crew don't get
Yeah.
through and that can't harm people. And instead, that's not what they did. I'll leave it at that. Uh, but okay, so we're literally like an hour over. So I am gonna go. That's the last question we're gonna be taking tonight, y'all. Thank you so much for coming. Um, Christopher has agreed to come back, so we'll have him back and we'll just do the same thing again. We'll talk about anything we want to, answer questions. I know that a lot of y'all find this very useful and it helps to understand the case. So I really appreciate you stepping in where I'm not really as familiar. Christopher, thank you so much. And yeah, we're gonna just sign off. Do you have anything else that you want to say to wrap up? Is there anything else you wanted to get out on this episode?
Well, thanks so much for the support, and we're going to continue looking at it. It's hard because we all got our lives and pressures and stuff like that. But I'm invested in this story, so I'm going to keep looking at it and commenting on it. I know, but we do need to support each other because there's a lot of information that we have to pay for and get and absorb and think about. And I look at your comments on Twitter. I learn from there. I get great ideas from that. So I don't respond immediately as I'd like to, but it's, because of life, but
You have other things going on as well, you have to balance your priorities.
yeah.
Um Yeah, no, this has been great. It's always, yeah, just whatever time you have to come and bless us with your presence is always wonderful. So, yeah, everybody, make sure you head on over to Christopher's channel, subscribe to his channel. He's a great YouTube channel. Follow him on Twitter. He occasionally posts and on Twitter, but he posts more than he's letting on. But yeah, make sure you follow him. I'll make sure to put his links and things in the description below. And yeah, we'll be back doing this again. So that's all we're gonna have for tonight. Fact, defamation, love you, Mina K.